The morning of September 19th, 1944. Hill 265, outside Arracourt, Lorraine. Through dense fog that blanketed the French countryside like a shroud, 12 Panther tanks of the 113th Panzer Brigade moved into ambush positions. Their commanders watched 5 American Sherman tanks crossing open ground below, seemingly oblivious to the steel trap closing around them. Inside those Panthers, German tank crews felt something approaching pity for the Americans rolling toward their death. The mathematics appeared inarguable. The Panther's 75mm KK-42 gun, 55 calibers long, could penetrate 140mm of armor at 1,000 meters. Its muzzle velocity exceeded 1,000 meters per second, giving its armor-piercing rounds a flat trajectory that made hitting distant targets almost trivial. The Sherman's 75mm M3 gun could barely scratch the Panther's frontal armor, even at point-blank range. At 2,000 meters, the Panther could destroy a Sherman with a single shot. At that same distance, the Sherman's rounds would bounce harmlessly off the Panther's 80mm frontal plate, angled at 55 degrees for an effective thickness approaching 140mm. German tankers had trained at this. They'd studied the ballistic tables at panzer training schools, memorized the engagement zones where their technical superiority guaranteed victory. They'd heard the intelligence assessments dismissing American tanks as mechanically reliable but tactically irrelevant, mass-produced mediocrity that American industry churned out because their engineers couldn't build anything better. The 75mm gun in the Sherman, German instructors had explained, was a low-velocity infantry support weapon that happened to be mounted in a tank. Against the Panthers, it would be worse than useless. Yet within 4 hours, 8 of those, 12 Panthers would be burning wrecks scattered across the hillside. The 5 Shermans would advance unscathed, their crews already calling in fresh targets for the artillery observers coordinating the systematic destruction of German armor. By day's end on September 19th, the fields around Arracourt would be littered with 49 destroyed German tanks. American losses stood at minimal, a handful of Shermans knocked out by anti-tank guns, not by the supposedly superior Panthers. Over the next 11 days until September 29th, the 4th Armoured Division would destroy or damage 200 German armoured vehicles while losing 48 of their own. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. What unfolded at Arracourt wasn't just a tactical defeat for the Wehrmachter's newly formed Panzer brigades. It was the systematic demolition of German tankers' last illusion that technical superiority in gun performance and armor thickness could overcome what they had dismissed as American tactical crudeness, backed by industrial mass production. The shocked German survivors would discover they hadn't been fighting tanks in isolation. They had been fighting an integrated weapons system that redefined how armored warfare actually worked, when one side refused to accept the enemy's preferred terms of engagement. The 75mm gun that German crews had laughed at became the instrument of their destruction, not through miraculous penetration of frontal armor, but through something German doctrine had catastrophically undervalued, the ability to be in the right place, firing at the right target, faster than the enemy could respond. The German counteroffensive had been born from Adolf Hitler's personal rage at the American breakout from Normandy. In early September 1944, as General George Patton's Third Army raced across France, the Führer ordered an immediate counterattack to crush American spearheads and restore German prestige. The newly formed 113th Panzer Brigade, along with the 111th Panzer Brigade and elements of the 11th Panzer Division, would smash into Patton's extended flank in Lorraine. The attack would restore the initiative, prove that German armor still dominated the battlefield, and remind the Americans that technical inferiority had consequences. The 113th Panzer Brigade fielded 45 Panthers and 45 Panzer IV tanks under Oberst Hans-Heinrich Freiherr von Seckendorff. The 111th Panzer Brigade, commanded by Generalmajor Heinrich Günther von Chełmoński, brought similar strength. These units represented Germany's last operational reserve in the West, hastily assembled and inadequately trained due to fuel shortages, but equipped with tanks that on paper far exceeded anything the Americans possessed. The Panther tank embodied German engineering confidence, taken to its logical extreme. Its 75mm KK-42L70 gun fired armor-piercing rounds at velocities that American tankers could only dream about. At standard combat ranges, it could penetrate 140mm of armor at 1,000 meters, enough to destroy any Allied tank frontally with contemptuous ease. The Sherman's M375mm gun, by comparison, could penetrate only 88mm at 500 meters under ideal conditions. To have any chance against a Panther's frontal armor, a Sherman needed to close within 100 meters, a suicidal proposition that guaranteed the Sherman's destruction long before reaching effective range. German doctrine emphasized the tank duel, long-range engagements where technical specifications determined victory before the first shot was fired. At panzer training schools, crews spent months perfecting gunnery at extended ranges, studying ballistic tables until they could recite penetration values in their sleep, practicing the geometry of the perfect ambush where German tanks would engage unaware enemies at ranges that made counterfire impossible. The Panther was designed as the ultimate expression of this philosophy. Let the Americans build quantity. Germany would build quality that made quantity irrelevant. German tank commanders entering the Arracourt operation carried with them not just confidence but certainty. Their intelligence officers had provided assessments of American armored capabilities that confirmed what they wanted to believe. The Sherman tank, intelligence reports stated, mounted a gun adequate for infantry support, but fundamentally inadequate for armored combat against modern German designs. Its armor provided protection only against light anti-tank weapons. Its height made it an easy target. Its narrow tracks limited cross-country mobility. Most damningly, its crews showed typical American indiscipline, preferring to spray ammunition wildly rather than employing the careful aimed fire that German training emphasized. The 75mm gun became a particular focus of German contempt. Crews were told the American weapon was essentially a scaled-up version of guns that had been obsolete before the war began. Its short barrel and relatively low velocity meant it lacked the energy to penetrate modern armor. American tankers, German intelligence suggested, probably didn't even understand the ballistic tables that would reveal their weapons' hopeless inadequacy. They would learn about armor penetration the hard way, when their shots bounced harmlessly off Panther glacis plates at ranges where Panther crews could destroy them with single well-placed rounds. Unknown to the Germans massing for their counter-offensive, the Americans had developed a completely different philosophy of armored warfare, one that made individual technical specifications almost irrelevant in actual combat conditions. Colonel Bruce Clark, who had helped develop American armored doctrine at Fort Knox, had overseen training manuals that emphasized speed, coordination, and combined arms integration over individual tank performance in isolated duels. The United States Army's approach stressed that tanks rarely fought alone in any real combat situation. They operated as part of teams that included infantry, artillery, tank destroyers, and air support, each element compensating for the other's weaknesses. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Williams Abrams, Jr., commanding the 37th Tank Battalion, embodied this philosophy completely. A 1936 West Point graduate who had transferred from cavalry to armor as the Army modernized, Abrams viewed tank warfare not as duels between machines with the best specifications winning by default, but as maneuver warfare where speed, aggression, and coordination mattered more than armor thickness or gun caliber. His battalion had trained relentlessly in combined arms tactics, practicing rapid target acquisition and firing on the move rather than the static, long-range precision shooting that German doctrine emphasized. The 4th Armored Division had developed specific tactics for fighting Panthers based on hard-won knowledge from Normandy engagements. They knew frontal penetration with the 75mm gun was essentially impossible except through incredibly lucky shots that deflected off the mantlet into weak points. So they practiced flanking maneuvers relentlessly, smoke deployment to blind German optics, and artillery coordination to suppress German tanks, while Shermans maneuvered for side shots, where the Panther's 40mm side armor could be penetrated even by the supposedly inadequate 75mm gun. They turned the Sherman's lighter weight and superior mechanical reliability into advantages that enabled rapid maneuver and sustained operations that German tanks couldn't match. September 18, 1944. The German counteroffensive began with the 113th Panzer Brigade advancing on Arracourt, expecting to sweep aside scattered American forces. German reconnaissance had reported only sporadic American presence, some infantry, tank destroyers, perhaps a company of Shermans that would be quickly eliminated once Panthers established fire superiority. But American intelligence was far superior to what the Germans realized. Ultra-intercepts had revealed the German concentration days in advance, providing American commanders with detailed knowledge of enemy strength and intentions. Artillery spotting planes tracked every German movement from the air. The Americans knew exactly where the Germans were concentrating, what units were involved, and roughly when they would attack. The Germans advanced blind into what they believed was weak resistance, unaware they were walking into carefully prepared kill zones. At 0800 hours on September 19th, 15 Panthers of the 113th Panzer Brigade advanced in textbook formation near Arracourt, confident their technical superiority guaranteed success. They never saw what hit them initially. American forward observers had been tracking the German advance for 30 minutes, plotting every movement on detailed maps while calling in fire missions to supporting artillery. As the Panthers crossed pre-registered grid coordinates that forward observers had marked days earlier, 12 batteries of American artillery, 144 guns ranging from 105mm howitzers to heavier pieces, opened fire simultaneously with devastating effect. The barrage that fell on the German tanks was unlike anything they had experienced, even veterans from the Eastern Front. The Americans had perfected time on target fire missions where shells from multiple batteries fired at different times from different distances all arrived on target at precisely the same instant, creating a wall of explosions that gave no warning and allowed no evasion. 3 Panthers were destroyed in the first minute of bombardment, not by enemy tanks, but by concentrated artillery fire that found weak spots in top armor or damaged running gear and optics. The survivors pushed through, shaken by the accuracy and overwhelming volume of American indirect fire that seemed to know exactly where they were at every moment. As German Panthers occupied Hill 265 overlooking Arracourt, they prepared to execute the ambush they had trained for. Their position dominated the surrounding terrain. Their guns could engage American armor at ranges where return fire would be futile. At 1,200 meters, perfect range for the Panthers' flat-shooting gun, the Germans opened fire on Abrams's approaching Shermans. The first round missed, the gunner perhaps overcorrecting for a range he had underestimated or misjudging the Sherman's speed. Before the German gunner could reload and fire again, all 5 Shermans fired simultaneously, not at the Panthers themselves but at the ground directly in front of the German positions, throwing up massive clouds of dust and smoke that immediately obscured German sightlines. Then the Shermans scattered, breaking formation and disappearing into dead ground that German reconnaissance had failed to map properly. Within seconds of the Panthers revealing their positions by firing, American forward observers embedded with the tank platoons were calling in artillery. White phosphorus shells burst among the German positions, blinding optics with burning smoke that clung to everything it touched. High explosive rounds, damaged tracks, jammed turret rings, and wounded crew members through concussion even without penetrating armor. The Panthers, designed for precision long-range shooting where their superior optics and ballistic performance would dominate, found themselves blind and under constant bombardment that made aimed fire nearly impossible. Through the smoke and dust came the Shermans, not frontally where German guns would slaughter them, but from 3 directions simultaneously. They had used terrain the Germans hadn't properly reconnoitred, dead ground and small valleys that allowed covered movement to positions where engagement ranges collapsed from over 1,000 meters to under 500. The Shermans emerged at ranges where even the supposedly inadequate 75mm gun could penetrate the Panthers' 40mm side armor with standard armor-piercing ammunition. The engagement demonstrated a critical advantage that German planning had completely failed to account for. The Sherman's hydraulically powered turret traverse could rotate 360 degrees in 15 seconds, allowing crews to engage targets in any direction with minimal delay. The Panther's manual traverse system, legacy of German manufacturing limitations and material shortages, needed 60 seconds for the same rotation, 4 times slower than the American system. At close range, where targets appeared suddenly from multiple directions, this differential proved immediately lethal. American crews trained to load and fire in under 4 seconds could pump multiple rounds into German tanks before Panther crews could even get their guns pointed in the right direction. The 75mm gun that German tankers had dismissed as inadequate became a rapid-fire weapon that overwhelmed German tanks through volume and placement rather than raw penetrating power. One of the best documented engagements occurred when Captain William Dwight's Sherman platoon encountered German Panthers near Lezay. According to official after-action reports preserved in 4th Armoured Division records, Dwight's gunner, Sergeant Donald Decker, destroyed 4 Panthers in rapid succession at ranges under 800 meters, exploiting the confusion and German crews' slow traverse to maintain fire superiority despite being technically outgunned. Decker's account, preserved in military archives, provides crucial tactical detail that explains how American crews turned their weapons' supposed weakness into a practical advantage. We came around the corner of a small wood, and there were 3 Panthers in the open about 600 yards away. They were traversing toward us, but we got the first shots off. I put 3 rounds of armor-piercing into the first one's side before he could get his gun around. It brewed up immediately. The second one I hit in the rear as he tried to back up, probably trying to get hull down or reach cover. The third one managed to fire once, but missed high. Their gunner probably rushed the shot. We knocked him out with 2 rounds in the side turret. This engagement demonstrated the American advantage in rapid engagement that German doctrine had never adequately addressed. While German crews followed elaborate firing procedures inherited from pre-war training, commander identifies target and provides range estimation. Gunner adjusts sights according to ballistic tables. Loader selects appropriate ammunition from the ready rack. American crews operated on instinct, developed through thousands of practice rounds fired under combat conditions. They sacrificed theoretical long-range accuracy for close-range speed and volume of fire. At Arracourt's typical engagement ranges of 500 to 800 meters, where terrain and smoke made long-range engagements impossible anyway, speed and aggression mattered far more than ballistic perfection. On September 20th, the Germans launched a major attack with elements of both the 113th and 111th Panzer Brigades, throwing roughly 40 Panthers and supporting infantry into the assault. Oberst von Seckendorff personally led the attack, demonstrating the German tradition of commanders leading from the front. The assault initially seemed promising as German tanks advanced under cover of morning mist that reduced visibility and negated American artillery observation. Some American outposts were caught by surprise as Panthers emerged from the fog at close range. But the American response demonstrated their systematic superiority in ways German planning had failed to anticipate. Within minutes of first contact, every American unit in the sector knew the German positions, strength, and direction of attack. Radio nets that connected every Sherman to battalion and division headquarters enabled instant coordination that German forces couldn't match. Artillery forward observers, embedded with tank units, called in immediate suppressing fire on German assembly areas. Most critically, as the weather began to clear, the 19th Tactical Air Command entered the battle with devastating effect on German armour that had no air cover whatsoever. Major Charles Bazooka Charlie Carpenter, flying an L-4 Grasshopper observation aircraft armed with 6 bazooka rockets, engaged German tanks directly from the air. In an interview with Stars and Stripes published September 25, 1944, Carpenter stated with characteristic understatement, "The word must be getting around to watch out for cubs with bazookas on them. Today they saw me coming and began to dodge. It's kind of hard to hit a tank going 60 miles per hour across a field, trying to avoid an airplane while also trying to maintain formation and watch for enemy ground forces. The combination of tanks, artillery, and air power created interlocking fields of fire that trapped German formations in kill zones with no good options. Panthers that stopped to engage Shermans were immediately bracketed by artillery that forced them to button up, blinding them and making accurate return fire nearly impossible. Those that moved to avoid artillery were attacked by fighter bombers that caught them in the open. Those that sought cover in woods or villages were flanked by fast-moving Shermans and M18 Hellcat tank destroyers that exploited their superior speed to reach firing positions before German crews could respond. September 21st brought catastrophic leadership losses to German command structure. Oberst von Seckendorff, leading from the front in accordance with German military tradition, was killed when his command Panther was destroyed by artillery fire that bracketed his position. His death immediately paralyzed the 113th Panzer Brigade's command structure. Subordinate commanders, trained in the German system to follow orders rather than exercise independent initiative, didn't know how to respond to rapidly changing battlefield conditions without explicit direction from above. The next day, September 22nd, Generalmajor von Chełmoński of the 111th Panzer Brigade was also killed in action when his vehicle was caught by American fire. The loss of both brigade commanders within 48 hours devastated German command and control at the moment when flexible leadership mattered most. In stark contrast, American doctrine emphasized command flexibility at every level. When commanders fell, subordinates immediately assumed control and continued executing the mission without missing a beat. Captain James Leach, commanding Company B of the 37th Tank Battalion, demonstrated this flexibility during the September 22nd engagement at WWII. When his radio was knocked out by a near miss from German fire, his platoon leaders continued executing the operational plan independently, maintaining coordination through visual signals and initiative. 7 of Leach's Shermans destroyed 17 German tanks while losing only 1 Sherman to a concealed anti-tank gun, a tactical performance that earned Leach the Distinguished Service Cross. As weather cleared from September 21st to 23rd, the full weight of American air superiority manifested in ways German forces were powerless to counter. 19th Tactical Air Command under Major General Elwood Pete Quesada had perfected close air support to a degree the Luftwaffe couldn't match even in its prime. P-47 Thunderbolts, carrying bombs and rockets, operated in continuous waves over the battlefield, appearing whenever German armor attempted to move or concentrate. The integration between ground and air forces was seamless, built on shared training and common procedures that made cooperation instinctive. Forward air controllers rode in Sherman tanks, using the same maps and grid reference systems as ground units, enabling them to vector fighter bombers onto targets within minutes of request with pinpoint accuracy. The P-47s could distinguish friend from foe at high speed and in confused situations. American tanks marked their positions with colored panels visible from the air and smoke grenades of specific colors that identified friendly units. German accounts from captured documents and post-battle interrogations describe the psychological terror of constant air attack that made daylight movement suicidal. Panthers designed to dominate ground combat through superior firepower and armor were utterly helpless against attacks from above, where their 16mm top armor, adequate against artillery airbursts, couldn't withstand direct hits from 500-pound bombs or 5-inch rockets. Even near misses could damage optics and fire control equipment, jam turrets through concussion, or wound crew members through blast effects that penetrated the tank without creating visible damage. The psychological impact of air attack exceeded its physical destruction. German tank crews couldn't concentrate on ground combat or maneuver effectively in daylight without risking air attack that could come from any direction with little warning. Movement became possible only at night or in bad weather, giving Americans complete battlefield dominance during daylight hours. The constant presence of American aircraft, observation planes that called in artillery, fighters that strafed any movement, and bombers that struck concentrations created a pervasive sense of being perpetually watched and targeted that shattered German morale. The engagement at WWII on September 25th demonstrated American tactical superiority at its peak, combining all elements of their combined arms doctrine into a textbook example that would be studied at military academies for decades. Company C of the 37th Tank Battalion, commanded by Captain Jimmy Spencer, faced a German force of approximately 30 tanks advancing across moderately open ground. Spencer had just 7 operational Shermans available for the engagement outnumbered more than 4-1 by an enemy equipped with technically superior tanks. Rather than meeting the Germans head-on in the kind of long-range slugging match German doctrine expected and where German guns would dominate, Spencer executed a tactical masterpiece that exploited every American advantage while negating every German strength. He positioned his tanks in hull-down positions behind a low ridge, exposing only their turrets to enemy fire while concealing their hulls behind terrain. This reduced the target profile his tanks presented while maintaining their ability to fire on advancing Germans. As the Panthers advanced confidently, expecting to overwhelm the small American force through firepower superiority, Spencer's tanks opened fire, not attempting to destroy Panthers frontally, which they knew was nearly impossible, but to disrupt and channel the German formation into predictable patterns. Simultaneously, Spencer called for artillery smoke rounds to blind the German tanks and obscure American positions. While the Germans struggled through smoke and incoming fire that forced them to button up and rely on limited vision through periscopes, Spencer sent 3 Shermans on a wide flanking maneuver through a small valley the Germans hadn't reconnoitred or covered with security elements. These flanking tanks emerged on the German flank at point-blank range, less than 400 meters, where even the 75mm gun could defeat Panther side armor reliably. They destroyed 8 Panthers in 3 minutes of rapid fire before German crews could even identify where the threat was coming from, let alone traverse their slow manual turrets to respond. The German formation, suddenly hit from 2 directions and blinded by smoke that made coordinated response impossible, fell apart in confusion. Individual Panther commanders made independent decisions without coordination, some trying to retreat, others attempting to push forward, still others simply stopping in place, uncertain what to do. This chaos gave Spencer's remaining Shermans and supporting tank destroyers clear shots at exposed flanks and rear armor as German tanks maneuvered wildly. Total German losses from the engagement: 17 tanks destroyed or disabled, 8 more damaged enough to require withdrawal. American losses: 1 Sherman damaged by a long-range shot, quickly repaired by maintenance crews and returned to service within hours. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. By September 24th, the Battle of Arracourt was revealing fundamental flaws in German armored doctrine that technical specifications couldn't overcome. The Panther, for all its impressive gun performance and thick frontal armor, suffered from crippling mechanical problems that multiplied exponentially under sustained combat conditions. The United States Army's Ballistic Research Laboratory would document in post-war analysis that in 30 separate engagements studied in detail, Shermans achieved a 3.6-to-1 kill ratio over Panthers, not through superior firepower that they obviously lacked, but through superior availability and tactical employment. The Panthers' final drive, chronically overstressed by the tank's 45-ton weight that exceeded original design parameters, failed frequently under combat conditions. Transmissions designed for a lighter vehicle couldn't handle the operational strain of sustained movement and combat maneuvering. The interleaved road wheel system, while providing excellent weight distribution and smooth ride characteristics in ideal conditions, became clogged with mud in Lorraine's wet autumn terrain. When mud froze overnight as temperatures dropped, it could immobilize tanks completely, crews arriving at their Panthers in the morning to find them trapped by frozen mud locked between the overlapping wheels. In direct contrast, the Sherman's mechanical simplicity proved its greatest strategic asset. The tank could operate for hundreds of miles between major maintenance interventions. Track tension could be adjusted in minutes using basic tools any crew member could operate. Engines could be replaced in 4 hours by trained maintenance crews using standardized procedures. Transmissions, designed with substantial reserve strength for the Sherman's 33-ton weight, rarely failed even under heavy use. When components did break, standardized parts meant quick replacement from readily available supplies that flowed continuously from Normandy depots. American maintenance units performed what seemed like miracles to German observers. The 37th Tank Battalion's maintenance platoon, led by experienced non-commissioned officers trained at Fort Knox in standardized procedures, kept 90% of their Shermans operational throughout the battle despite continuous combat and the inevitable wear on mechanical systems. German units were fortunate to maintain 50% operational readiness even when not in active combat. By September 26, more Panthers were disabled by mechanical failure than by enemy action, German tank strength evaporating not through heroic American attacks, but through the quiet collapse of overstressed mechanical systems that German industry lacked the resources to properly support. The Battle of Arracourt must be understood within the broader strategic situation of September 1944 that shaped everything about the engagement. Both armies faced severe fuel shortages as supply lines stretched across liberated France, but the American response differed fundamentally from the German situation in ways that determined operational possibilities. General Patton's Third Army operated on strict fuel rationing, receiving 25,000 gallons daily, when 75,000 gallons would have been optimal for unrestricted operations. Yet this limitation, severe as it was, sparked American innovation and aggressive scrounging that kept tanks moving. The Red Ball Express, the legendary truck convoy system staffed primarily by African-American quartermaster units, moved 12,000 tons of supplies daily over routes exceeding 300 miles through liberated territory. When official supplies proved insufficient for Patton's aggressive operational tempo, he authorized what might charitably be called unauthorized fuel acquisition. Units sent foraging parties to requisition fuel from other commands, sometimes stretching supply regulations to their breaking point, but keeping the advance moving when strict adherence to allocation would have meant immobility. The German supply situation was catastrophic in comparison, shaped by years of attritional warfare that had gutted logistics capabilities. The hastily formed panzer brigades had been promised adequate fuel and ammunition to execute their counter-offensive, but promises meant little when reality intervened. Panthers consumed fuel at 2.5 gallons per mile cross-country, meaning a full 200-gallon tank provided. Only 80 miles of range before requiring refueling. With supply lines under constant air attack from roaming fighter bombers and fuel production crippled by strategic bombing that targeted synthetic fuel plants, German tanks often sat immobile, waiting for fuel that never arrived in sufficient quantities. Ammunition posed another critical crisis for German forces that American logistics had solved months earlier. American Shermans carried a mixed load of armor-piercing, high-explosive, and white phosphorus rounds totaling over 90 rounds per tank, allowing engagement of various target types, from enemy armor to fortifications to infantry positions. Artillery ammunition flowed continuously from well-stocked Normandy depots through efficient supply chains that prioritized combat units. German Panthers, primarily supplied with armor-piercing rounds optimized for the tank versus tank duels their doctrine emphasized, couldn't effectively engage infantry concentrations or soft targets that made up the majority of battlefield threats. When ammunition ran low during sustained combat, German crews had no ability to resupply under battlefield conditions where American air superiority made daylight movement suicidal. The devastating effectiveness of American artillery reached its peak on September 26, when the Germans attempted another major assault intended to break through American positions through sheer weight of numbers. The 4th Armored Division's artillery, reinforced by corps-level assets that provided additional heavy guns, could mass the fire of over 150 guns on a single target within minutes of a fire mission request. The American Fire Direction Center system represented a genuine revolution in artillery employment that multiplied the effectiveness of every gun many times over. Forward observers equipped with radios and precise maps could call for fire using simple grid coordinates that any trained observer could provide. Fire direction centers using pre-calculated firing data and mechanical computers could translate observer requests into specific firing commands for individual batteries in seconds rather than minutes. Multiple batteries positioned across kilometers of front could engage simultaneously with shells arriving on target at precisely the same instant through time-on-target calculations that synchronized different flight times from different distances. The result was walls of explosions that gave enemies no warning and no chance to take cover before shells arrived. German forces, accustomed to Eastern Front warfare, where artillery was often scarce and poorly coordinated between different units, were psychologically shattered by the volume and pinpoint accuracy of American fire that seemed omnipresent. Every German concentration attempting to form up for attack was immediately bracketed by artillery that scattered formations and inflicted casualties before they could even begin their advance. Every assembly area was saturated with shells that destroyed vehicles and demoralized crews. Movement in daylight invited immediate bombardment, called in by the observation aircraft that circled constantly overhead, watching for any sign of German activity. The official unit history records that on September 26th alone, American artillery supporting the 4th Armored Division fired over 15,000 rounds, an expenditure that would have been impossible for German forces to match even if they had possessed the guns. German artillery, limited to a few dozen guns with minimal ammunition reserves that couldn't be replenished under American air interdiction, could manage only sporadic counter-battery fire. American sound-ranging equipment quickly located any German guns that revealed their positions by firing, bringing down overwhelming counter-battery fire that destroyed German artillery or forced it to displace constantly, preventing sustained fire missions. The Battle of Arracourt also demonstrated the deadly effectiveness of American tank destroyer doctrine that had been developed and refined at Camp Hood, Texas. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M18 Hellcats mounting 76mm guns, operated according to the seek, strike, and destroy philosophy that emphasized mobility and firepower over armor protection. The M18 Hellcat represented the opposite design philosophy from the Panther in almost every respect. Where the Panther emphasized armor protection and firepower at the cost of mechanical complexity and reduced mobility, the M18 prioritized speed and tactical flexibility above all else. With a top speed of 55 miles per hour, making it the fastest tracked vehicle of World War II, and mounting a powerful 76mm gun that could defeat Panther side armor reliably, Hellcats could appear suddenly from unexpected directions, engage targets with devastating effect, and disappear before German return fire could arrive. On September 27th, a platoon of M18s, commanded by Lieutenant Edwin Leiper, executed a textbook tank destroyer action that would be taught at armor schools for decades. Concealed in a tree line that provided both cover and observation, they allowed a column of German tanks to pass their position, then engaged from the rear where armor was thinnest and crews least alert. In 12 minutes of systematic destruction, Leiper's platoon destroyed 5 Panthers and 3 Panzer IVs, before relocating to a new firing position to avoid the counterfire that German doctrine would inevitably direct at their last known location. Not one M18 was hit during the engagement, their speed and mobility allowing them to control engagement ranges and break contact at will. The tank destroyers' contribution to American victory went far beyond their direct kills, significant as those were. Their presence and known capability forced German tanks to constantly watch their flanks and rear, slowing advances and disrupting formations as commanders diverted attention from frontal threats to protect against the fast-moving tank destroyers that could appear from any direction. The speed of the M18 meant American commanders could respond to German threats faster than German reserves could exploit any breakthroughs they achieved. By the battle's end, the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion claimed 39 confirmed kills against just 4 M18 lost, a kill ratio that validated the American tank destroyer concept despite ongoing debates about its doctrinal value. The tank destroyers had proven that in actual combat, mobility and tactical flexibility often mattered more than the heavy armor that made German designs so impressive on paper, but so difficult to employ effectively. The battle's climax came on September 29th, when General Hasso von Manteuffel, one of Germany's most capable and experienced panzer commanders, personally arrived to assume command of the shattered brigades and lead one final assault. Manteuffel brought considerable tactical expertise and a reputation for aggressive leadership that had earned respect throughout the German army. His attack began at 0600 hours with the last operational Panthers, approximately 30 tanks representing everything the Germans could scrape together from their depleted units, advancing in conjunction with infantry from the 11th Panzer Division in a carefully coordinated assault. The assault demonstrated professional competence despite overwhelming material disadvantages that would have caused lesser commanders to abandon the effort entirely. German forces used terrain effectively to mask their approach, maintained good coordination between tanks and infantry despite communication difficulties, and pushed forward with determination even as casualties mounted. But the American response was overwhelming in its coordination and firepower, the full weight of combined arms warfare executed with precision that German forces couldn't match. Colonel Bruce Clark, commanding Combat Command A, had anticipated the German attack through intelligence intercepts that provided hours of warning. American tanks were positioned in carefully prepared defensive positions, with pre-planned artillery concentrations already registered on likely German approach routes. As German forces advanced into what they hoped would be a breakthrough, they entered a carefully prepared kill zone where every American weapon could engage with maximum effect. The destruction was methodical and systematic. Artillery fire separated German infantry from their tank support, forcing the infantry to seek cover while Panthers advanced alone. Tank destroyers engaged from carefully chosen positions on the flanks, while Shermans held the center, refusing to be drawn into long-range duels where German guns would have advantage. As morning fog lifted and visibility improved, P-47 Thunderbolts arrived in squadron strength, adding their bombs and rockets to the maelstrom of fire tearing apart the German formation. By noon, Manteufel's attack had failed completely despite his tactical skill and his troops' courage. 22 German tanks lay destroyed or abandoned across the battlefield. The remaining forces withdrew toward the German border, their counter-offensive comprehensively defeated. The dream of throwing the Americans back and restoring German prestige in Lorraine had died in the killing fields around Arracourt. When the Battle of Arracourt ended on September 29, 1944, the results were staggering by any measure of armored warfare. From an initial strength of 262 tanks and assault guns committed to the counter-offensive, German forces retained only 62 operational vehicles at battle's end, representing a catastrophic loss rate of 76%. The 113th Panzer Brigade had ceased to exist as an effective fighting unit, its survivors scattered and demoralized. The 111th Panzer Brigade was similarly devastated, unable to conduct operations above company strength. The 11th Panzer Division, one of the Wehrmachter's veteran formations with years of combat experience, was reduced to roughly regimental strength. American losses, while not insignificant in human terms, were far lighter in proportion to forces engaged. The 4th Armoured Division lost 48 tanks during September 1944, with approximately 25 tanks and 7 tank destroyers lost specifically during the Arracourt battles from all causes, including mechanical failure and mines. Most damaged American tanks were quickly repaired by mobile maintenance teams and returned to service within days or even hours. Crew casualties remained relatively low due to the Shermans' better escape hatches and internal layout that facilitated quick evacuation when tanks were hit. The kill ratio of approximately 3.6 to 1 in favor of American forces contradicted everything German doctrine predicted based on technical specifications. The Panther, superior in both armor protection and gun performance on paper, had been decisively defeated by the supposedly inferior Sherman that German tankers had laughed at before the battle. But the victory hadn't come through miraculous improvements in Sherman firepower or through heroic individual actions, though there were plenty of those. It came through superior integration of combined arms, better tactical flexibility that adapted to actual battlefield conditions, superior logistics that kept tanks running and supplied, and overwhelming artillery and air support that German forces simply couldn't match or counter. The United States Army's immediate after-action analysis of Arracourt provided crucial insights that would influence American armored warfare doctrine for decades, and reshape how military theorists understood modern combat. The Armored Force Board at Fort Knox compiled exhaustive reports from every participating unit, creating a comprehensive picture of what actually determined outcomes in modern armored warfare rather than what pre-war theory suggested should determine outcomes. The analysis reached several conclusions that contradicted accepted wisdom about tank combat. First, The battle proved conclusively that technical specifications alone didn't determine combat outcomes in any predictable way. The Panthers' superior gun and armor meant little when American forces refused to fight on German terms by accepting long-range duels where German advantages would dominate. By using artillery to suppress German tanks, aircraft to attack from above where armor was thin, and maneuver to strike from flanks where even inferior guns could penetrate, American forces systematically negated every German technical advantage. The 75mm gun that couldn't penetrate Panther frontal armor became devastatingly effective when firing into 40mm side armor at close range. Second, mechanical reliability proved far more important than maximum performance in determining actual combat power over sustained operations. A Sherman that could fight every day and cover hundreds of miles between maintenance stops was worth far more than a Panther that spent half its time deadlined for repairs or consumed so much fuel it couldn't maneuver freely. The ability to sustain operations continuously, to keep tanks running and fighting day after day without lengthy maintenance halts, multiplied combat power in ways that armor thickness or gun penetration couldn't match. An operational Sherman with a supposedly inferior gun was infinitely more valuable than a broken-down Panther with a superior gun sitting immobile 20 kilometers behind the lines. Third, crew training and tactical flexibility trumped individual heroics or reliance on technical superiority. American tank crews, products of standardized training at Fort Knox using proven methods refined over years, operated with consistent competence across entire units. They could perform any role in the tank through cross-training, coordinate instinctively with other arms through shared doctrine, and adapt to changing situations without requiring detailed orders from higher headquarters. German crews, increasingly composed of hastily trained replacements due to cumulative casualties over years of war, couldn't match this institutional competence built through systematic training programs. Fourth, logistics determined strategic possibilities more than tactical outcomes. The American ability to supply fuel, ammunition, and spare parts continuously, even at the end of a 400-mile supply line stretched across France, enabled sustained operations that kept pressure on German forces without respite. German forces, unable to maintain adequate supply even with shorter lines of communication, saw their tactical options progressively constrained until immobility meant inevitable defeat. Superior tanks meant nothing when they sat immobile for lack of fuel or ammunition. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, whose tactical leadership and aggressive execution proved decisive throughout the battle, provided a comprehensive assessment in his after-action report that captured the essence of American success. Abrams emphasized that victory came not from any single factor, but from the systematic application of combined arms doctrine that integrated all available weapons into coordinated action. His 37th Tank Battalion had demonstrated that aggressive action supported by artillery and air power could defeat technically superior opponents through better tactics and coordination. Shermans didn't need to be better tanks than Panthers in isolated specifications. They needed to be part of a better system that maximized their strengths while compensating for their weaknesses. Abrams would later become Chief of Staff of the United States Army, and his experiences at Arracourt influenced American armored doctrine throughout the Cold War and beyond. The M1 Abrams tank, named in his honor and entering service in 1980, embodied lessons learned at Arracourt by emphasizing reliability, crew survivability, and systems integration over pure technical specifications, divorced from operational reality. The Abrams tank wasn't designed to win duels through thickest armor or biggest gun, but to operate effectively as part of combined arms teams that could dominate battlefields through coordination and sustained operations. On the German side, General Hasso von Manteuffel provided perhaps the most telling assessment of what Arracourt revealed about German failures. In post-war interrogations conducted by American intelligence officers, Manteuffel stated bluntly that Arracourt demonstrated the complete bankruptcy of German tactical doctrine for armored warfare. Wehrmachar's long-standing emphasis on technical superiority and individual warrior prowess, deeply embedded in German military culture, had proven utterly inadequate against American systematic warfare that treated combat as an industrial process rather than an arena for heroic individual achievement. The Americans, Manteuffel observed, had industrialized combat in ways German thinking had never truly grasped. They turned war into a production process where superior organization, overwhelming logistics, and methodical application of combined firepower guaranteed victory, regardless of individual weapon system specifications. German tankers might be better trained in gunnery. German tanks might have superior armor and guns. German tactical theory might be more elegant, but none of that mattered when Americans could bring to bear such overwhelming superiority in artillery, air power, logistics, and operational sustainment. The Panthers' technical excellence became irrelevant when it couldn't reach the battlefield due to fuel shortages, couldn't maneuver due to mechanical breakdowns, and couldn't engage effectively due to smoke and suppressive fire. The Battle of Arracourt represented a triumph of American intelligence gathering and processing capabilities that multiplied the effectiveness of American forces. Ultra-intercepts of German communications had provided strategic warning of the counteroffensive days before German troops moved, allowing American commanders to position forces and prepare defenses. Tactical reconnaissance, conducted by armored cavalry squadrons and light observation aircraft, provided continuous updates on German positions, movements, and strength that kept American commanders informed in near real time. The integration of intelligence from multiple sources created unprecedented battlefield awareness that gave Americans decisive advantages. Colonel Oscar Koch, G2 intelligence officer of 3rd Army and one of the war's most capable intelligence professionals, had developed innovative techniques for intelligence fusion that combined information from all available sources. His staff correlated ultra-intercepts with aerial reconnaissance photos, prisoner interrogations, and captured documents to create comprehensive enemy assessments that often revealed German intentions before German subordinate units received their orders. At Arracourt, American commanders frequently knew where Germans would attack, with what forces, and roughly when, giving them time to prepare a reception that turned German plans into disasters. This intelligence advantage multiplied American combat power immeasurably. Knowing where Germans would attack allowed positioning of reserves and preparation of artillery fire plans. Understanding German fuel shortages enabled tactics that forced excessive maneuvering, burning precious fuel, and increasing mechanical breakdown rates. Awareness of German mechanical problems suggested aggressive pursuit that prevented recovery of damaged vehicles and denied Germans time for maintenance. Intelligence transformed combat from uncertain chaos into calculated engagements where Americans held most advantages before fighting even began. The unglamorous but crucial role of maintenance units deserves special recognition for enabling American success. The 126th Ordnance Maintenance Battalion, supporting the 4th Armored Division, performed mechanical miracles throughout the battle that kept American armor rolling despite the inevitable wear of sustained combat. Operations. Operating from forward positions, sometimes under artillery fire, maintenance teams kept American armor running at unprecedented operational rates that German units couldn't approach. Master Sergeant John Fulner, a maintenance platoon sergeant whose work exemplified the professionalism of American maintenance troops, described the system in a 1945 interview with Yank magazine that captured the industrial efficiency Americans brought to field maintenance. We had assembly line maintenance down to a science through constant practice and standardization. Track repair took 1 hour with a trained crew. Engine swap required 4 hours with proper equipment. Transmission replacement took 6 hours maximum. We had spare parts stockpiled at company, battalion, and division level in organized supply points. If something broke, we could fix it or replace it within a day in most cases. Tanks hit on Monday could be fighting again by Wednesday if the damage wasn't catastrophic. This maintenance capability meant damaged tanks returned to action quickly instead of sitting deadlined for weeks awaiting parts. A Sherman hit in combat on Monday morning could receive repairs and return to its unit by Wednesday, barely disrupting operations. German Panthers requiring specialized tools, hard-to-find spare parts, and factory-level precision for many repairs might remain disabled for weeks if they could be recovered at all under American artillery fire and air attack. The cumulative effect of this maintenance differential was that American units maintained high operational readiness, while German strength steadily declined through attrition. Combat effectiveness also depended significantly on medical support, and here too, Americans held decisive advantages that affected both survival rates and troop morale. The 4th Armored Division's medical battalion could process casualties from initial collection through surgery within the golden hour that dramatically improved survival rates for serious wounds. Tank casualties presented unique challenges, including burns, traumatic amputations, and blast injuries, requiring immediate specialist care. American medical doctrine emphasized far-forward surgical hospitals, staffed with specialists who could perform life-saving surgery close to the front. Plasma for blood volume replacement, morphine for pain management, and sulfur drugs for infection prevention were available at company level, meaning wounded men received critical treatment within minutes of injury. Helicopter evacuation, though still experimental in 1944, saved critically wounded tankers who would have died awaiting ground ambulances traveling over damaged roads. The psychological impact of comprehensive medical support cannot be overstated in its effect on combat effectiveness. American tankers fought aggressively, knowing that wounds weren't automatic death sentences and that their army would move heaven and earth to save them. German tankers, aware that medical support was minimal and evacuation uncertain given American air superiority, fought more cautiously, knowing they were largely on their own if wounded. Weather played a crucial but complex role at Arracourt that affected both sides in different ways. The morning fog of September 18th through 21st initially seemed to favor German attacks by masking their approach and negating American advantages in artillery observation and air support. But fog also eliminated the Panthers' primary advantage, its ability to engage at long range where its superior gun dominated. Fog forced combat at close ranges where Shermans could effectively engage Panther side armor and where American advantages in turret traverse speed and crew training offset German firepower advantages. When weather cleared September 21st through 23rd, American advantages multiplied dramatically. Clear skies brought overwhelming air support that devastated German armor whenever it attempted to move or concentrate. Good visibility enabled artillery observers to engage distant targets with precision that fog had prevented. The autumn sun dried muddy terrain, improving mobility for lighter Shermans, while Panthers still struggled with heavier ground pressure that bogged them down in soft ground. Rain returned September 24th through 26th, creating mud that particularly affected German operations in predictable ways. The Panthers' interleaved road wheels, designed to distribute the tank's weight effectively, became clogged with mud that froze overnight as temperatures dropped. Several Panthers were immobilized not by combat damage but by frozen mud locking their running gear solid, rendering them helpless until crews spent hours clearing the wheels. Shermans with simpler track systems and wider track spacing could break free with their own power, or required only quick maintenance to restore mobility. Weather disadvantaged both armies at times, but German forces suffered more from its effects due to their tanks' mechanical complexity and limited logistics. American signal communication superiority provided another decisive advantage that shaped every engagement. The 4th Armored Division operated multiple radio networks simultaneously, connecting different functional areas. Command nets linked commanders at all levels. Fire support nets connected forward observers with artillery. Logistics nets coordinated supply. Air support nets integrated close air support. Every Sherman tank had 2 radios, the SCR-528 for communication with other tanks, and the SCR-506 for communication with supporting arms, allowing crews to monitor multiple frequencies simultaneously. The SCR-528 radio in American tanks provided reliable voice communication at ranges exceeding 10 miles under good conditions. These FM radios, resistant to interference and difficult for enemies to intercept or jam, enabled secure tactical coordination that German forces couldn't match with their limited and shorter-ranged radio equipment. German communications, dependent on fewer radios with shorter practical ranges, frequently failed under combat conditions. The Fu-5 radio set in most Panthers had a practical range of only about 2 miles, and when command tanks carrying more powerful radios were destroyed, German units often lost communication entirely with higher headquarters, This communications breakdown accelerated German tactical collapse at critical moments. When subordinate units couldn't communicate with commanders or with each other, coordinated action became impossible. Units acted independently without knowledge of what neighboring units were doing, leading to uncoordinated piecemeal attacks that American defenders defeated in detail. The Arracourt battle validated the massive American investment in training infrastructure that had created the world's most comprehensive tank crew training program. Fort Knox Armored Force School had developed standardized training that produced consistently excellent crews across all units. Every American tanker at Arracourt had completed 17 weeks of basic and advanced individual training teaching fundamental skills. 13 weeks of crew collective training integrated individuals into cohesive teams. 8 weeks of unit, combined arms training taught coordination with infantry, artillery, and air support. Live fire exercises with full ammunition allocations provided realistic combat experience. Maintenance training on every tank component meant crews could perform field repairs. This training created standardized excellence where any American tank crew could operate effectively with any other unit, knowing procedures and tactics were consistent. The loss of individual crew members through casualties, while tragic, didn't eliminate unit effectiveness because cross-training meant every crew member could perform every role if necessary. German training had collapsed by 1944 under pressure of casualties and resource shortages. Fuel shortages meant minimal driving practice for new crews. Ammunition shortages limited gunnery training to theoretical instruction. The complex Panther required extensive training that couldn't be provided during hasty formation of new units. Many German tankers at Arracourt had less than 100 hours of actual tank experience compared to American crews with over 1,000 hours of training before entering combat. This training differential showed in every engagement where American crews operated smoothly under pressure while German crews struggled with basic tasks. Arracourt must be understood within the broader strategic situation of September 1944 that shaped the battle's significance beyond its immediate tactical results. The WWII was collapsing on all fronts simultaneously. Soviet forces had destroyed Army Group Center in Operation Bagration and were approaching German borders from the east. Allied forces had liberated France and Belgium and were approaching the German frontier in the west. Strategic bombing had devastated German industry and fuel production. Romania had switched sides, cutting off crucial oil supplies that Germany desperately needed. The counter-offensive at Arracourt represented one of Germany's last attempts to regain initiative in the west and prove that German arms could still achieve decisive victories. Its comprehensive failure meant Germany could no longer mount significant offensive operations anywhere, reduced to defensive fighting that could only delay inevitable defeat. For the Americans, Arracourt validated their entire approach to warfare that integrated industrial production, systematic training, technological innovation, and tactical flexibility into overwhelming combat power. The combination of mass production, standardized training, technological integration, and tactical adaptation had proven superior to German emphasis on technical quality and warrior prowess. The battle demonstrated that American methods could defeat any enemy anywhere through systematic application of combined arms warfare. This lesson would influence United States military doctrine throughout the rest of the 20th century and beyond, establishing principles that remain relevant today. The story of Arracourt cannot be told without acknowledging the human reality of armored combat that statistics and tactical analysis tend to obscure. Tank warfare was not the clean mechanical duel often portrayed in sanitized accounts, but a terrifying experience of fire, explosion, and death that tested courage to its limits. The crews who fought at Arracourt, American and German alike, displayed extraordinary bravery in conditions of extreme danger, where death could come instantly from any direction. The Sherman, despite its tactical victories, remained vulnerable to catastrophic destruction when penetrated. A Panther's shell penetrating a Sherman could ignite ammunition stored in the fighting compartment, creating an inferno that gave crews only seconds to escape before fire consumed everything. The tank's grim nickname among some troops, Ronson, allegedly after the cigarette lighter advertised as "lights first time every time," reflected this deadly reality that haunted every crew. German tankers faced equal horrors from different causes. Panthers hit by white phosphorus shells filled with toxic smoke that suffocated crews if they remained inside. Burning white phosphorus adhered to anything it touched, creating wounds that were agonizing and difficult to treat. Crews faced an impossible choice between staying inside and suffocating or evacuating under machine gun fire that American infantry directed at any movement. Tank commanders who fought with open hatches for better visibility were particularly vulnerable to artillery airbursts that sprayed shrapnel into turrets, causing horrible wounds. The wounded faced agonizing experiences regardless of nationality. Burns were terrifyingly common from contact with hot metal, flaming fuel, or burning phosphorus, creating injuries that period medicine struggled to treat effectively. Traumatic amputations from shell fragments were frequent and shocking. Concussion from near misses could cause permanent brain injury and psychological trauma without any visible external wounds. Yet amid this horror, moments of humanity emerged that transcended the hatred propaganda promoted. American medics treated German wounded alongside their own, following Geneva Convention requirements, but also responding to shared humanity. Tank crews on both sides sometimes risked their lives to extract enemies from burning vehicles, knowing that their own situation could be reversed in the next engagement. Local French civilians, despite suffering under years of German occupation, often provided aid to wounded on both sides, maintaining human decency even in war's midst of war. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe. The fields around Arracourt in September 1944 became a graveyard for German ambitions and German armour. The Panthers that rolled confidently into battle, their crews certain that technical superiority guaranteed victory, lay burning across hillsides and roads. The 75mm guns that German tankers had laughed at, dismissing them as inadequate infantry support weapons, that had destroyed German tanks not through miraculous penetration of frontal armour, but through something more fundamental. American crews had refused to accept German terms of engagement. They had used terrain, smoke, artillery, air power, and aggressive maneuver to create situations where technical specifications became irrelevant. They had turned the Shermans' supposed weaknesses into tactical advantages while exploiting every Panther weakness that German doctrine had ignored. The German tankers who survived Arracourt carried back to a crumbling Reich a truth that no propaganda could counter. They had encountered a form of warfare they couldn't match, not because American tanks were individually superior, but because the Americans had created a system of warfare that turned every advantage into multiplied combat power. The shocked survivors had seen the future of armoured warfare, and it was American, industrial, methodical, and utterly overwhelming. The 75mm gun that couldn't penetrate a Panther frontally had become a weapon of systematic destruction when employed by crews who understood that modern warfare was won not by individual duels, but by coordinated application of overwhelming force at decisive points. At Arracourt, German tankers had learned what their high command had refused to acknowledge. Technical superiority meant nothing against an enemy who simply refused to fight the way you expected, who used artillery and air power to negate your advantages, who maneuvered faster than you could respond, who kept more tanks operational through better maintenance, who supplied their forces effectively despite longer supply lines, and who trained their crews to a level of consistent excellence you could no longer match. The Panthers burning in Lorraine's fields told a story that transcended tactics and technology. They marked the point where German military excellence, real as it had been in earlier years, met industrial democracy's systematic superiority and was ground into defeat. The Battle of Arracourt stands as more than a tactical victory for American arms. It represents the validation of American military philosophy developed between the world wars, the idea that industrial democracy's strengths could be translated into decisive military superiority through systematic application of combined arms warfare. German forces had arrived confident in their technical superiority and tactical doctrine, certain that the Panthers' gun and armor guaranteed success against inferior American equipment. They discovered instead that modern warfare had evolved beyond their understanding into something they were powerless to counter. The 75mm gun they had laughed at became the instrument of their destruction, not through changed capabilities, but through changed employment by crews who understood that victory came from systems, not specifications.